busy with my radar system now. This right now is just locked in there. But what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna instantiate that. So I've got my command pod here, fully interactive. I've got my notifier component and I've got my radar component. So right now I'm just switching on my radar component. So when the game starts up, I immediately can see my radar component and see if it's animating properly and this kind of thing. Now, you'll notice what I did here is I created the back layer, and then this radar is actually a separate layer, and then this line here is also a separate layer. And what I'm trying to do is essentially animate a sort of radar pattern. So here it goes. 4.6, here we go. There we go, there we go. Okay, it's doing its thing. So I want it to be a little bit different, so I want to create a pulse and a stroke, almost. And then I want to plot everything around me. So it will almost serve as a mapping, but it's also a way to navigate the scene. So if you hit this button or that button, that's what you'll do it. Okay, so I can see the ships in my air and I can see the stuff on the ground. So I'm pretty happy with this display. You can make it more or less transparent, but for now I think it's pretty cool. And I'm pretty happy with this animation, so I did this with the animator and it works quite well. Okay, so now, this shows me I've got 7 ships in my airspace. So now if I hit this airspace, if I hit this button, I want to of course see what's in my airspace. And currently you can't see, so I want to see if I can make this look like a real radar and make every ship like transpond its position, and then plot the little icons. So it's pretty cool, and this is all done with Mechanim. I haven't written a single line of code yet, except this is all done in code. So yeah, I can see my inhabitants in grid form, but what I really want to do is see them on the radar. I think radars are awesome. And by the way, this is going to be like a hyperspace radar, right? It's more modern. Aliens has been here for millions of years. Anyway, so I like the look and feel of that. I think it looks pretty cool. So now I'm ready to sort of write the code behind this and start creating my little icons. Okay. So what I found works well for me is if I actually create a 2D button. So let's do the airspace first, right? And then we'll see how far we get. So my source image right now is going to be there it is. We want a friendly aircraft. It doesn't really matter what we take, because this is going to be changed. I want to preserve my aspect ratio, and what I also want to do is set it to its native size. So I see native size wise though, it's maybe too big for this map. I might make it smaller. But what I can also do, maybe I can just do the anchor thing. Let me see. No, I don't want to stretch it. You see, it's because this radar stretched. Let me see if I center this. I'll probably not stretch it. Okay, I was dumb. Anyway, I got a pulse, I got a stroke, and now this is going to be called a blimp. Okay. So now obviously for different screen sizes, this is gonna matter how big this blimp is. So I'm probably gonna need to, it's also gonna, it's got this text here, which I don't think I'm gonna display text. This is gonna have a blimp. So I'll do a set native size. Okay, friendly aircraft. Maybe I just want to up the color. This is a little bit more visible. And then again, maybe I want to go down because when I highlight it, I want it to be fully visible. And then obviously when I hit the button, so when I highlight it, I hit the button, then I'm going to have additional UI elements spawned at its location. So it's a little complex, but we're going to get there. I want to maybe set the width. I don't know what this is. So right now it's at 0, 0, 0. My pivot is in the middle. My native size. So let's just make that a little bit smaller. Position 0, 0, 0. And that, my friends, is a blimp. Now I'll get to what is inside the blimp right now. But what is important is I'm going to create a prefab of that blimp so I can spawn plenty of them. Okay, so I'm going to just go to my prefab GUI and create a blimp. And now I'm going to drag the blimp in there. Cool. So this means if I change it, I can add all kinds of stuff to it, change the way it highlights, all this kind of stuff later on, as long as I can sort of spawn it. Okay. So I started with my, so back to the code. It's all fun and games until someone gets hurt. Now, I'm not going to have a long session. I'm going to try and wrap this up by 1 o'clock. Got some more important meetings tomorrow. But essentially what I wanted to do, I've got my radar. So the first thing I want to do is expose or get the pulse. And the stroke, because I might want to change my buttons based on their position if the pulse or the stroke goes over them. Alright, so Unity Engine UI, I've got a pulse and a stroke image, I've got actual radar. I want a reference to the actual radar image, because that's going to be essential for calculating relative positions. Right. And now what we're going to do, so what I always do is I segregate I sort of like a little Unity, I don't know. It's just the way I code in Unity. I like to think of my behaviors as having beliefs and behavior, because it is a behavior component. It's not a class per se. It is a class, but it behaves differently. It behaves across time. So that's how I call this: beliefs, behavior. And then what I do, so if I want to, these are going to be called my definitions. Okay. Now what I want to do here immediately is, don't forget serializable. There you go, public class. Blimp. Okay, and that's going to be a public game object, prefab. Let's just call this blank definition, so we don't confuse it with the actual blimp. Then we'll have a image associated with it. In this case it will be a sprite, and that sprite will be how the blimp looks. And what I also want to do, now this is where sometimes I get conflicted, because I don't know if I want to declare it inline or outside. And in this case, I think I'm going to actually declare a separate file. The reason is I want to use this blimp definition in the interface, and then I don't want to reference the class dot blimp definition. I want to be as efficient as I can. Okay, so I'm going to put that in classes, call the blimp definition. Right, I'm going to take this out. For lack of a better word, it's a blimp. Using Unity engine. I know, it's very scientific. .UI maybe. And Unity definition. Unity engine. And I want to give this blimp definition. I'm going to make this a blimp type. Rather than use a string, I'm going to use a enumeration. So once again, I just want to take out all that nonsense. So blimp type is essentially aligned to these kinds of things. Okay, and I actually think I'm going to call this blimp type, and I'm going to add a new enum called blimp icon. Okay, so blimp icon would be inhabitant. It would be a spaceship. Inhabitant spaceship mech. And then we have vehicles. Let's just say ground vehicle. Make sure we terrestrial. Ground terrestrial. Okay, doesn't matter. So that's my blimp icon. My blimp type is going to be neutral, enemy, friendly, neutral, friend, and enemy. My blimp definition, I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to give it a blimp type, a blimp icon, and I'm going to give it a blimp type. Okay, so that namespace stuff, take that out. Great. So blimp icon, blimp type. So now the power of this is if I design more types of icons, I just add an enum type. And then the rest of the engine will work fine. I can just set up my definitions, right? So this is what I want. So I want some repository type style blimping going on, right? Now, this is for my command pod. In fact, let's just move this to command pod. This is my next generation UI. Good. So for definitions right now, I'll keep that tag there. I don't need canvas that much. But now,
always prepare for a hurricane. Well,
now when I gonna use my radar, now I'm gonna have a public Blimp definition. This is all my definitions. Okay, so definition will have an icon, it will have a prefab, it will have a type, a kind, and a name. Okay. Now what we want is we want to, on the actual Blimp, attach a class. So I'm going to call that radar Blimp. Add it to the project, and I'm definitely going to put it in the GUI's class. So radar Blimp, by the way, is going to be, I've got my own behavior base. I don't know if I want to make individual sounds, so I'll just keep it on behavior base for now. Okay, so by the way, that's radar. Great. So the first thing we want here is the Blimp definition that this radar Blimp is using. I'm going to make this not visible in the editor. This thing is going to construct itself basically. So so let's just segregate the beliefs from the behavior. Okay, the second thing, which is probably more important, is it will actually reference a game object. I'm just going to call this a game object. And so using a definition, it will actually now do all the stuff it needs. Now, on awake, because what I need here is I want to reference the radar component. I want to cache it. So radar, I'm going to assume is a parent component, radar. Okay, if it's not, I'm just going to assert so that I can debug this. Okay. Awake, radar Blimp, all of this good stuff, right? On the radar, I want to also set a Blimp container, which is that's going to be a transform. So I want to sort of point it to a sub branch and create all my blimps in there. Okay, and then we'll take it from there. Right. So awake. Awake, we don't do anything. I want this to be kind of dynamic in the sense of it has to scan the whole scene, but certain layers. That's maybe where I could set up the I've done this before. What would be very nice is if I can find every single object within a layer. It doesn't look like I'm going to get that. Okay, so that means for now I'm going to try and create a welcome. Join me on my chat. I'm going to create a so one way of doing it is scanning the entire hierarchy, finding the objects, okay, and then periodically asking them for their positions, which will be parameterized. We can do that. I'm scared these scenes are going to get big, so instead there's certain objects that are like certain components that are like manager components, right, that keep track of things. One example is, for example, pathfinding. Needs to keep track of every single object. So I'm rather going to use an interface where I'm going to ask those objects for an array of objects that can provide me with information. So I'm going to create a little API for my radar. That's basically what I'm doing here. So instead of writing a lot of code, I'll try and make it as efficient as possible, right? So I'm going to add an interface here. And I'm going to call it the iRadar provider. And I want to put it inside there. And before I say okay, I did it. Okay. So this is basically going to be like one or two of my manager classes. Okay. Now, these things need to return to me INumerable. Of type iRadar info or iBlimp. Let me think about this. Yeah. And then we'll just call this get blimps. And that's all the radar provider needs to provide me. Okay. Now you'll notice I declared something that's not there yet, so I'm going to have another interface called iBlimp. Okay, now all the iBlimp is basically we'll just have a transform. If I'm lucky, this is a property. So I can slap it onto any game object without actually thinking about it. Let's just quickly have a squiz of the documentation. So if I go Unity Engine, let me show you here. Unity Engine game object, there's transform and transform itself. It doesn't tell me if it's a property. Hang on. I just want to get to one where I actually reference the transform. It is. So it looks like a field, but it's actually a transform. So I'm just going to make sure that my object is a blimp. And if it's a blimp, it will give me a transform. But what it also need to do is give me information about itself. So we'll have a name, and we'll add a description later when we need it. Okay. Never over-engineer something, just get the basics. I think the name is also a property on a game object, so we'll be good. Right, so I've got my radar provider. get blimps, right? So this is where from a radar's perspective, I'm gonna have a static. Yeah, I have to have a static. A static hash set. Okay, the reason I need a static is because I want to instantiate a radar component up and down. Now, next thing I want to do, if I don't need the radar, I'm going to get rid of it. And then hopefully I'll get rid of all the blimps underneath it. And then manage memory like that. But what I want to do is I want to add a static register, and that'll be a radar provider. And the reason I do this is so that okay, so there's two things I do. The hash set makes sure hey, welcome. Yeah, this is a good question. I've been programming for about since I can remember. I've been programming since I was about 16. I'm 34 today, so but I'll tell you what, in the last couple of years, Unity is making it easier. And when I started programming, I had to use languages like C#, C++, which were much more complicated. Nowadays, C# is like very simple. You don't have to worry about pointers and shit like that. Anyway, okay, so I'm using a hash set. So a hash set is basically a way of making sure that I only have unique radar providers. Now what I want to do is I want to make a static unregister method. And the reason I want to do that is when my radar provider destroys itself, it needs to unregister with this thing. Otherwise, we're going to have a dead reference. To a provider, and it's going to start, and then that's where your game goes sour very quickly. Okay, so I have these radar providers now. I have oh, by the way, this game is called Inhabitant. So if you want to have a look at it, it's called inhabitantgame.com. So you can more or less see what we're busy doing. I'm busy working with the new Unity GUI. Yeah, I highly suggest going through the tutorials. And I mean, you don't have to build a game like I'm doing. I mean, I'm trying to almost build a AAA game. It's been taking me 2 years to do so. But going through tutorials and those videos will help you a lot. What helped me a lot in the beginning to get used to 3D is even though I did it like in school and university, refresh your math around vectors if you want to do 3D and even 2D. Vectors are very important. Vector math, you use it all the time. And the best, for me, the best is Khan Academy. So if you go to Khan Academy, search for vector math, I think it is, or linear vectors, something like that, and go through those videos. That helps a lot. That will get you used to sort of the math behind it. The actual coding, it's practice. You just need to understand the basics of coding. And for Unity, you can get components you don't even have to do scripting. There's Playmaker, for example, that will do some of the stuff for you, so you don't have to code it, but you won't have the ultimate control, right? So you can build simple games with it, but you won't be able to fucking build Tomb Raider or whatever. So, but start small, write your first game, try 2D, then go 3D. It takes you a while. It's hard work. It's the hardest thing I ever did. It's really fucking, it's super, super hard. And I've been coding for years, and I can tell you now, since I started this game, it dwarfs every single project I had throughout my career. So it's massive. So anyway, I'm going to now take this interface. So interface is like a contract, right? And my contract is, I want someone to provide me with blimps. That's all I want. And a blimp is basically, right now, a way to get a name and a transform. That's all. So if you think of interfaces as simple contracts, it works very well. So I'm going to go to my main AI class. No, let's go to, so I want to know what ships are in my airspace. For that, I'll go into vehicles, and there's a traffic controller. And the traffic controller controls all the spaceships in my airspace. Now, what I'm now going to do, and you'll notice it already has a bunch of interfaces here, so I'm going to add another one, and I'm going to call it a radar provider. Now notice, it's almost when you do it properly and you think about things, it almost becomes like a book, a vocabulary. I've got a ship traffic controller, which is a type of behavior, which is a persisting finalizer, which means it's persisting data. It's a command pod provider with a counter display. Here it is. In other words, is that display there? It's going to update that display. And it is a radar provider. Okay? So how cool is that? I immediately know what this thing is doing. So immediately when I come into the code, I know, oh, okay, it's a radar. I can immediately see what kind of behavior this thing is implementing. Okay? So this is where programming comes into play. It's when you start using interfaces, generics, and really use the language to its fullest potential. A lot of game developers don't do that, and this is why we can do things faster, because we understand the shortest way and the most solid way to do something. And that's just understanding the language and the language constructs. Now, get blimps. Now, this is expecting me to return a bunch of blimps. But before I do this, I need to now, this component now, when it awakes, it needs to register itself with the radar controller. So it's called radar. Register. See, that's why we use the static. We don't care about the instances yet. So we register ourselves. And now we have a void update here. Now we need to add a void destroy. So when this ship traffic controller gets destroyed, it will unregister itself with the radar controller, which means the radar will now not ask it for blimps. Makes sense? Right. Now for the meat of the situation. So getting these blimps from the ship traffic controller literally means okay, don't know where to go. I'm literally gonna send it, or I'm gonna point it to all my spaceships. It doesn't know what IEnumerable is, just resolve that. Some system collection generics. Okay. That's IEnumerable, sorry, or Blimp. iBlimp. Okay. Now it's compiling. Okay, so once we got this compiling, now we can get to the meat of this. So what I want to do here is return all the ships in my airspace. Remember, that's what I said. A ship is controlled by this component, spaceship controller. Okay, so all I now need to do is tell the spaceship controller, you are my blimp. Now when you compile, it will tell you whether or not it fulfills the contract, right? So if it fulfills the contract of being a blimp, meaning it needs a transform and it needs a name, it says yes, it's good. Why? Because the base game object has got a name and it's got a transform. So now we can go and say for each ship in this I think it's called all. I have to see, get all spaceships. So this will return not only the ones that are on the air, but the ones that are in the dock. Okay. And now we use a little cool command called yield return ship. Okay, so what does yield do? It's like an iterator. So it will yield, it will return a ship, and you'll see how this works together. So instead of allocating an array, I just yield return, okay, which means I'm not using a bunch of memory. I'm using it as this thing is returning ships to me. Okay, so now I have my shift traffic controller. That is as easy as it is to generate a radar implementation. Now, one thing I forgot here is on my contract, and this is the power of interfaces now. I actually need to specify the Blimp definition so that the component looks at the definition and sees whether or not it's got blimps for it. So for example, if I don't want ships, then the ship traffic controller shouldn't return me anything. I don't want to show ships on my radar, or spaceships on my radar. The ship traffic controller shouldn't return anything to me. Again, all spaceships. Okay, I need to just simplify this quickly. I don't want to make it static. Don't worry about this. This is code that I wrote a long time ago. But essentially, I just want to get the crux of it, right? So, because I'm using the instance method, I'm going to say find all spaceships. There you go. Okay, I just need to be enumerable of spaceship controllers. Now, what's cool is because I changed my contract, this says, hey, you don't implement a raw get blimps blimp definition. That's why when I go to blimps, I need to now pass in the blimp definition. Okay, so if the definition dot type not type, sorry, icon if it's on a spaceship, okay, then we yield break. So now what we do is we make sure when the radar is asking for this component to return its blimps, but it's asking for inhabitants, it shouldn't return its spaceships, right? That way we can match the definition to the ship. Good. Now this thing, believe it or not, is almost finished. And you'll see it in action right within a couple of minutes actually. So now, once these providers are registering themselves, all we now need to do, okay, let's add some parameters here. First of all, we don't want to go and ask for blimps all the time. Like a real radar, it's got a bit of a delay. And the reason we want that delay is so that we don't eat up our frame rate, right? So we'll have let's just say update interval Okay. And we'll give it a default of 5 seconds. We'll change this in the editor. This is where the power of Unity comes in, because Unity is going to visualize all of these parameters for us. Okay. So update interval is 5 minutes. Now I want a private float called resume time. And this is just a very useful pattern. So when I don't really care about awake, when this component starts, okay, I want to set the resume time to the current time plus my update interval. So plus 5 seconds. Okay. Now, when this component updates, now I can say if my current time is smaller than my resume time, return. That's all you do. You just return. First line. You don't have to go if this, what. You just break out of the loop. Keep your code as simple as possible. Right. So, what I want to do now is I want to see also. So I can, instead of building a separate if, I can just say, or my providers dot length, or not length count, is 0. So if I have no providers giving me radar data, why do we waste our time? Let's just get on with it. Okay, now obviously when this now comes back, we have to set the resume time to time plus the update interval. Right? So now next time when it comes in here, it's going to wait another 5 seconds. Next time it's going to wait another 5 seconds. Update gets fired every frame. So be very careful what you do in here. So in this case, we only every 5 seconds want to do hard work. Okay. Now, the next question we want to ask ourselves is what Blimp icons to display. I'm just going to call this filter. Normally I would have made this a bit mask, but Unity don't understand bit masks that nicely. Okay, anyway. So that's my filter. So let's say for now our filter is going to be spaceships. Sorry, Blimp icon spaceships. Right? Just making sure everything's saved there. Right. So now, for everything in my filter, so I use a little for loop. Now what I want to do is I want to create another section region here, and this is where this is what I call the implementation, and this is really where the meat of the system is, right? So here what we want to do, for example, is we want a method to return to us the Blimp definition. we'll call it get definition, and we'll pass in the blimp icon. Okay. Now I just realized something. And this is the power of using classes. So, those two, by the way, should be a separate class. I'll tell you now why. Let's just call this blimp image. And let's serialize that. So depending on the enemy, you'll have a prefab, but depending on what type, enemy, friend, whatever, you'll have a different sprite. Okay? And I know we haven't really spoke about enemies and friends yet, so we'll get there. Okay, so I changed my blimp definition. Notice how clean this is now. On my radar, I go through my filter, and now I need to find a definition. For filter I. Okay, so here we're just gonna go literally once again a quick loop just to go through our definitions. So it needs to be indexed icon. So if I find it, I just return it. I don't need to do anything else. I don't have to do anything else on the loop. I just return, and then if I don't find it, return all. Okay. So if the definition at this point is null, it means we didn't find it, which means we just continue with the filter. If we have, now we go for each radar provider. And we go ask the question, hey, provider, give me all your blimps for this definition. That's what we're doing. And that's our enumerable. And this is where enumerables come in. Because now this is going to give me blimps in awesome. Now we just have to do the math and plot them. Okay. So we have to do some math and we have to do some instantiation. Now, we wrote a little class called spawner to do instantiation so that we can cache objects. So we always use spawner.instantiate, and spawner is like a little API on top of spawner.spawn. And now definition.prefab, and mind you, if the definition is null or the definition.prefab is null, continue. Otherwise, use the prefab, spawn it, at transform, and this is where this part comes in, at the Blimp container. So it's asking for a vector 3 position, so that will be, well, for now just spawn it in nowhere. We'll rotate it later. Okay, so that's spawning my little UI element. Now what I want to tell that element is that its parent is the Blimp container. So we put everything into the Blimp container. Okay. And now we also want to go and say, hey, do you have a Blimp, a radar Blimp component? If it doesn't, we're going to add one. My update speed is very slow. I don't know why. Let's see something here. Right. So now we got our radar Blimp component. This is stuff we know. We don't know what the game object does, but we know what our component does, right? So first of all, its definition is now going to be the definition and radar Blimp the game object, and you know what I'm going to call it, like a game object. It's going to be our Blimp. Actually, just want to call it Blimp. So instead of game object, we're just going to have a Blimp. Now, of course, Unity will not know what a iBlimp is and how to display it, so just hide that, and private variables it won't display. So this component is really just for our use internally. We're not going to add it anyway. I wonder if I can just say hide. Maybe. Maybe. In fact, it was already a game object variable, so that would have caused an issue. Okay, so here this component now, we got the Blimp. So the Blimp is set to that Blimp there. Okay. And now we're going to tell our radar Blimp to configure itself. You don't even have to. It will configure itself when it starts up. It will configure itself and hopefully it will position itself. Yeah, let's see how this goes. So radar Blimp will now when it does an awake extra, but when it does a start, this is when it's going to go and change its image. And the first thing it's going to need to know is its image. Let's call it sprite. Okay, so this sprite equals definition. See, now we're missing a little bit of information here. Right now, I was just going to change the sprite. That's all I want. On iBlimp, we have to tell the radar the type of blimp. In fact, that should be blimp type. Okay, so now I change the contract again. That is what happens. Okay, so blimp so first of all, if at this point blimp is null or the definition is null, then we don't even want to go anywhere. We just want to disable log ourselves an error so we can go and come fix it. User's never going to see this. And return. Okay. So blimp. Get the blimp type. Now we know the type. Now we need the kind. The kind is in the definite or the icon. So the icon is the definition dot icon. Great. And we'll make this public. The reason we want to do this is we just want to cache the information. But it also helps to see it when it's live and working, right? So seeing it in the editors makes all the difference. Alright, hopefully you'll be up and running by 1 o'clock. Great, so that's going to return us an icon, but that's just a type. So this basically describes it. Now we're going to say our, by the way, the sprite, by the way, is going to be get component image. So notice I do these because unfortunately debugging is working, but it can be difficult to debug with Unity. And games are just very difficult to debug. That's why all the time I've got this little hawk and I'm implementing shit. So I changed the contract of iBlimp, which means if I now implement this interface, it now expects a Blimp type. Okay. So for now, I'm going to return neutral. With inhabitants, we can actually provide even better logic. Anyway, so beliefs, it has a payload, it knows the species, and now it's going to do a Blimp type, squawk. So now when I rebuild this, it's all building. So now all that's left to do is to set this GUI up. It's warning us that we're not using this, which is actually pretty cool, because if we don't need it, okay. But we're actually gonna need it, because this thing is gonna position itself on the radar. So we need the radar. Just not now. So right now, all I want is I want some blimps to spawn. That's all I want. And then we'll work on the actual math. And in fact, I wonder if I need to do this real time. So, also on my radar, I want to keep a list of the blimp bar, because I already see what's going to happen here. It's called the radar blimp, by the way. I already see what's going to happen here, right? I need to make sure I get rid of all these guys. No, I don't reference them anymore because they reference other objects. So if I don't destroy them, they'll hang around a memory. I don't want that. So garbage collector will think that those objects are still referenced and therefore they're alive. And the second reason I did this is to say it's a list. So if Blimps, in fact, let's just make a quick variable here. So if that blimp is equal to the blimp that is passed in, then return B. Okay. Else return null. We'll see, we have a lot of lookup methods like this all the time. So the reason I wanted to do that is to, instead of spawning otherwise we're going to keep spawning and spawning and spawning. We don't want to do that. We first want to see if it's already on the radar, we reuse it. So if it's a new ship, it will create a new blimp. Okay, so one last thing is on update. I want to keep updating the type. And that's why we need the radar, because radar has a resume time. So let's just make this internal. So don't you want to see the results? I'm almost there, so I'll be done before 1 o'clock. So the radar resume time is tricky. So all we now need to do is based on that radar resume time, we're not going to make these blimps update. Okay, unless they hit the update interval. Right, so we basically created 2 components, 2 interfaces, and a bunch of classes to manage all of this. Now, here's the cool part. Once we've done all this, just change the code a bit. So this is our main pulse of our radar. The blimps are responsible for positioning themselves once they have a reference to the object. So now here's the cool part. Let's go into Unity. It's going to compile our code. Really? So I'm using Unity Pro. Let's see what errors are being made here. That looks better. That's something that's with the demo. Anyway, okay, so there's our pulse. We made a prefab of the blimp. Let me just make sure we did that. We did. Okay, so the blimp has got an image, it's got a button, and that's all we need. Let's just check the code quickly. So all I want to do on icon, all I want to do here is say my sprite dot sprite equals definition and we didn't finish our definition. So here we'll have public images. Let's call them sprites, by the way. And now I'm going to write a little method here that says get sprite. I'll call this get sprite for the type, right? And now what we want to go is we're just going to go that's the last part I forgot to do. So now the sprite is basically going to be definition of get sprite for the type, right? And now we say if the blimp sprite is not equal to null, this dot sprite equals blimp sprite dot sprite. There you go. And we actually want to extract the method out of this, so we just want to say update sprite. Make that private. Great. So many things to keep in your head. It's like playing chess. So now I call update sprite. So every time it updates. So let's say one of our neutral crafts. So let's say you shoot at one of the spaceships. It will turn into an enemy craft. Okay. Which means the image or the sprite needs to change. And this is where this update sprite comes in. So it will ask that object, what are you now? Are you enemy, are you friend, or are you neutral? And he will return to you and say, I'm an enemy. And then the sprite will change. At least that's the theory. So we just compile this lot, and now it's all Unity. We can automate this little sub-engine, radar engine, all the way now. Oh, sorry, I called this a Blimp sprite. And you'll see why I structured it like this. Okay. This is the fun part, is setting it up. So now on my radar, I'm going to add a new component. So it compiled our code. It's still compiling, by the way. Just wait for it to finish there. In the corner, it's showing like a little progress icon. Okay, it's almost done, I think. Yeah. So now deep space is where I keep all my scripts. I want to go to GUI. I want to go to radar. Boom. Here's my radar script. Now it asks for my Blimp container. Okay. So first thing I'm going to do is delete this Blimp. I don't need that one. I'm going to apply that. I'm going to create an empty game object and call this Blimps. And we'll apply that to the prefab so it includes it. So now the Blimp container is going to be this object right there. So we can put all our blimps underneath this blimps node or transform. Next thing it's asking us to do is to assign the pulse. There's the pulse. Assign the stroke, which is the thing that goes around like that. And the radar, which is this object here. And now here's the cool part. These are definitions. So right now, if I look at Photoshop, we got 1, 2, 3, 4 types. Okay. We'll talk about it in detail. So this is the class I wrote. definitions. This is Blimp definition. I go 4. Now it's asking me for a name and an icon. So the icon right now, the first one is inhabitant. So I'll call this inhabitant. So that's why I put the name, so that I can see in the designer what it's called. And it's asking for a prefab. And that's where we drag our prefab in. And now the sprites, this is our images. I'll get to that now. Let's do the second one. The second one, icon, is a mech. We'll call them mechs. And the prefab will also be a blip. So how powerful is this now? If I now create a different prefab, maybe I want to add an animation or something to it, I can just swap it out in the designer without ever changing my code. Spaceship, and I'll call this spaceships. And the prefab is a blimp. Good. And the last one is a ground vehicles. And for ground vehicles, we choose ground vehicle, and the prefab's a blimp. Okay, so that, let's apply that. So that's already, so now it's locked in. Now we just need to point it to our images. So each one of these has got 3 sprites. The first one is neutral. So now we just need to find neutral inhabitant, which is this guy here. Okay. Now we set that one to friend, and we just find friend. See how easy that is. And this one to enemy, and we find our enemy. So there's our inhabitants setup. Now for mechs, same thing, 3. So we go find a neutral. That's a neutral mech. Now find a friend. So let's type in friend, friendly mech, and enemy, enemy mech. Okay. And by the way, those enemy icons look awesome. Sometimes I surprise myself. Now, for spaceships, we want neutral, we want friend, and we want enemy. And that, my friends, is how it is done. Last one. Ground vehicles. We have a neutral transport. We have a friend. And we have an enemy. And this is where the power of using Unity with C# comes in. Look how easy this was. I just captured all the rules for my radar. And I'm going to apply this now. And I can go back here and change the prefab or change a sprite. Okay. Without going and changing the code. It's all done in the designer. I wrote myself something that's exactly like that. And exactly like the animator. Any other components. See how beautiful this works. So now I have my radar. And I'm just going to put spaceship as a filter. Now hopefully my aircraft controller is going to register itself and return aircraft. And what we should be seeing is we should see this blimps populate. That is if all the code is working. If not, we'll have to troubleshoot, and we have 15 minutes to do that. Before I need to hit the bed. And boom, blimp, blimp, all neutral, blimp, 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 blimp. Now let's wait till another spaceship. Oh, this is not working. Oh shit. Not working, it's cloning too much. It's partly working. It's a feature. So if we look at the radar, and the reason is it's because I'm being very, very stupid and I'm not adding it to my collection. And that's why it's not finding it. So now that it's added to the collection, it'll find it next time, and I don't duplicate it. Small little buggeroo. Nothing to be worried about. What I do want to do, whenever I see code like this, I'll just go continue. Let's see. This is where the reliability of Unity comes into question sometimes. Because I don't know what it's doing. And I'm hoping it's going to be solved with the 64-bit editor. It's maybe just running out of space. I don't know. Great. So now, the first thing we want to see, within 5 seconds is the will have blimps. And the positions are wrong. So if I put this position at 0, 0, there's my blimp. Okay, so they're there. Okay, I'm going to download iTunes, stop the broadcast. This is how far we're going to go for tonight. It creates the blimps. Next step is to calculate their positions on the radar. Great. Okay, something I want to do, just the last little thing. Let's make sure that I got my radar prefab. The reason I want this is I want to only create the radar when I hit that button. So I don't even want it on my scene. Okay, because it might take a while to load. So a quick adjustment is going to be on my command pod, controller. Let's call this create an action called start radar, and we'll put blimp. We'll make this params, so it's easier doing it like that. Great, and then stop radar, we'll destroy it. So if radar equals null, spawner dot destroy. I think it's destroy. There it is. Destroy radar dot game object. And then one little tweak that I wanted to do, not a little tweak, something I forgot, is when I spawn this instance, I want to actually set the instance dot name equal to the blimp name, so I can see what's going on here. So stop radar will destroy the radar. Start radar will now do var game object equals spawner. Spawn, and we want the radar prefab. So go null return. So we'll just do a vector30 quaternion identity. So go transform dot parent equals radar container. Okay, now we've set up the radar. Now we're going to say radar equals go.get components radar. So here, if we have a radar, no need to start it again. In fact, if it's null, do all of this stuff. Okay, and then set the filter equal to filter. What else did we have to do for radar? All the other stuff, filter, interval, pulse, all that stuff's already set up, resume time, stroke, update interval, all of that stuff set up. We're just going to set up the filter, and then we'll stop the radar. So if the pod side is left for the counter display, and that, my friends, is how it is done. In fact, I'll do Blimp icon. Here you go. So now hopefully we'll spawn our radar scene at exactly 1 o'clock. We're done. Well, why don't I just want to create a radar in the scene? Well, the scene is quite big, and the radar has got animations. I only want to show the radar when the player wants to see it. And especially, I don't want the animators to kick in, all those animations to kick in on startup, because that takes a while. Right. I mean, it already takes forever to start the scene. I was going to a toilet. I'll be back. Right. So I realize my mistake now. So I didn't do a I don't point the radar container, and I sure as hell don't point the radar prefab. Try again.